When Russian forces crossed into Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin expected his special military operation to last 3 days, maybe a few weeks at most. The Ukrainian government, he theorized, would collapse with a decisive early strike. The military would surrender, and Russian flags would fly over Kyiv before NATO could even respond. Game, set, match. But 3.5 years later, Ukraine not only survived the initial onslaught, but it's systematically dismantling what was supposed to be the world's second most powerful military, and it's costing Russia everything. Let's look at how Ukraine outplayed Putin at nearly every turn, and the heavy toll Russia is about to pay. When we look back at the start of the invasion, Putin's plan was pulled straight from Russian classic military textbooks, a move that turned out to be Ukraine's greatest advantage. Ukraine had spent decades as part of the Soviet Union, so Ukrainian commanders knew exactly how Russia operated. And on day one of the invasion, they used that knowledge to deliver a devastating blow. The Battle of Hostomel Airport should have been Russia's triumph. The strategy was simple and elegant. Between 200 and 300 Russian paratroopers on 34 helicopters would swoop in to capture the airport just miles from Kyiv. Russia would then use Kyiv's airport to create an air tunnel to funnel troops directly into the capital. It was the same playbook Russia had used successfully in Czechoslovakia in 1968, Afghanistan in 1979, and even Crimea in 2014. But Ukraine was ready. Instead of an empty airport, Russian forces ran into man-portable air defense systems, a Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun, and a runway deliberately blocked with old vehicles and scrap aircraft. Ukraine's radar network, which was coincidentally the largest ground-based radar-guided air defense network in Europe due to leftover equipment from its Soviet roots, had been hardened against Russian electronic warfare through NATO cooperation. When those Russian helicopters arrived, they flew into a kill zone. Even though Russians eventually captured the airport, it was too late. The airstrip was destroyed, the air tunnel never materialized, and Putin's 3-day war turned into a grinding siege of Kyiv that Russia would ultimately lose within 5 weeks. This pattern of exploiting Russian predictability would repeat throughout the war, but never more spectacularly than in September 2022. By summer 2022, Russia had captured the strategic city of Izium and established it as a major forward operating base with approximately 18,000 troops. The city served as a critical logistics hub, with railway lines running from Russia to Kupiansk and then to Izium. Control of Izium meant Russia could efficiently supply its entire northern front, but Ukrainian General Oleksandr Syrsky was quietly preparing a masterpiece of military deception. Throughout July and August, Ukrainian and Russian media both talked endlessly about a major Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kherson Oblast in the south. On August 29th, Ukraine officially announced the long-anticipated Kherson offensive had begun. Russia frantically redeployed its best units southward, reducing forces in Izium by at least half. It was all a ruse. On September 6th, Ukrainian forces launched their real offensive in Kharkiv Oblast, taking Russian forces completely by surprise. The advance was devastating, as Ukrainian troops moved an average of 4.6 miles per day, making it the fastest offensive operation in over a century of warfare. Within 6 days, Ukraine had recaptured over 1,150 square miles of territory, liberated dozens of towns, including the strategic cities of Izium and Kupiansk, and captured or destroyed hundreds of pieces of Russian military equipment. Russian forces simply fled, abandoning ammunition depots, tanks, artillery, and even newly deployed equipment. Some Russian units were completely lost, marking the first time since World War II that whole Russian formations had vanished in a single battle. All the while, Russian soldiers were fleeing from Ukrainian forces in northeast Ukraine, and citizens in Moscow were partying to celebrate the city's 875th anniversary, completely disconnected from the disaster unfolding on the battlefield. If the Kharkiv counteroffensive proved Ukraine could win on defense, the August 2024 Kursk incursion demonstrated something even more audacious. Ukraine could invade Russia itself. The operation was bold to the point of recklessness. Ukraine diverted precious forces from defensive positions to launch a cross-border attack, capturing roughly 480 square miles of Russian territory in Kursk Oblast. For reference, this was more territory than Russia had managed to capture in all of 2024 up to that point. The strategic brilliance was multi-layered. It shattered the myth that Russian territory was invulnerable, forced Russia to divert 50,000 troops away from other fronts, and undermined Western hesitation about providing Ukraine with advanced long-range weapons. Since Ukraine invaded Russia using its own forces and Putin didn't launch nuclear weapons, that entire calculation changed. Within months, F-16s, Mirage 2000s, and advanced missile systems were flowing into Ukraine, all with permission to strike targets inside Russia. The Kursk incursion remained contested for well over half a year, with Ukrainian forces still controlling portions of the territory as late as June 2025. Russia allegedly employed North Korean troops to reinforce its counteroffensive, a move that highlighted just how desperate and under-equipped its army had become. Perhaps Ukraine's most transformative innovation has been its revolution in drone warfare. In 2022, Ukraine's domestic defense industry was worth around $1 billion. By 2025, it had exploded to $35 billion, with Ukraine producing roughly 1/3 of all weapons and ammunition used by its armed forces, and nearly 100% in drones. Drones accounted for 70 to 80% of all Russian battlefield casualties by early 2025. Ukraine developed everything from small FPV drones costing a few $1,000s that destroyed million-dollar tanks, to naval drones that forced Russia's Black Sea Fleet to abandon Crimea, to long-range drones capable of striking deep into Russian territory. The crown jewel was Operation Spiderweb in June 2025, where Ukraine struck 5 Russian air bases simultaneously, damaging or destroying 1/3 of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. These precision attacks use FPV drones enhanced through mobile networks for long-distance control, embedding their signals within civilian data traffic to evade detection. Ukraine's domestic innovation network, over 900 suppliers from large firms to garage workshops, shared improvements through platforms like Brave One, enabling rapid adaptation and decentralized innovation. Prototypes went from design to battlefield deployment in months, not years. Western support, however, bought Ukraine the time to build this ecosystem. Weapons like HIMARS, Patriots, and F-16s fundamentally changed Ukraine's capabilities. HIMARS enabled precise strikes on hundreds of Russian command posts, while Patriot systems intercepted hypersonic Kinzhal missiles. The arrival of F-16s and Mirage 2000s allowed Ukraine to contest air superiority for the first time. Still, Ukraine understands it can't win through manpower alone. It has focused on attrition efficiency, minimizing losses while maximizing Russian ones. Tactics include rotating troops to prevent burnout, using drone reconnaissance for every movement, and decentralizing command operations in easily relocatable civilian sites. Ground drones have become vital for logistics and casualty evacuation as manned vehicles become high-risk targets. Combined with precision weapons and constant adaptation, This approach has made every Russian advance disproportionately costly. By early 2025, Russian progress had slowed dramatically. Captured territory fell from over 165 square miles per month to just 78. Each new gain required 5 times as many assaults as before. Equipment losses exceed 23,000 Russian units compared to Ukraine's 10,000. Over half of those were Soviet-era stockpiles that are now nearly depleted. Russia's production rates cannot keep pace, managing only 250 T-90M tanks per year versus thousands destroyed. Economically, Russia faces collapse. Defense spending now consumes 40% of the federal budget. Oil and gas revenue dropped 35% year over year, and sanctions eroded export profits. The EU's impending phase-out of Russian imports and China's steep discounts further cripple the economy. Over 1.1 million casualties and declining enlistment have gutted Russia's working-age population and labor force. Russia's once powerful defense export industry has contracted by over 90%, and its reliance on nations like Iran, China, and North Korea has shown its isolation. Meanwhile, NATO has only grown stronger, with Sweden and Finland joining, Germany boosting military spending, and allied infrastructure expanding across Central Europe. At Russia's 2025 rate of advance, 68 square miles per month, it would take over 230 years to occupy Ukraine, costing up to 100 million Russian lives. Clearly, something must give, and all signs point to Russia's exhaustion. Ukraine, now stronger than ever, continues to innovate and fortify. Its defense industry thrives, its soldiers are battle-hardened, and its Western partnerships are deeper. Russia, by contrast, is bleeding men, machines, and money. What began as a 3-day operation has become a disaster that threatens Russia's very existence. Ukraine has not only survived, it has humiliated its aggressor. Putin set out to rebuild an empire. Instead, he's overseeing its disintegration. By every measure that matters, Russia's war in Ukraine has been a strategic blunder of historic proportions. The initial shock and awe failed. The blitz to Kyiv collapsed. Russia's attempts to adapt field tactics, replacing officers, shuffling units, mass mobilizing conscripts, have only highlighted the system's fundamental weaknesses. Every setback on the front translates into ripple effects: political embarrassment, economic strain, and shrinking global leverage. The conflict has reshaped both countries. Ukraine's military, forged in crisis and necessity, has become one of the most technically innovative armed forces in the world. The networked approach enabled rapid learning cycles, change on the battlefield rippling through doctrine, hardware, and manufacturing within weeks. Combined with Western ISR data and precision weapons, Ukrainian units decimated Russian logistics hubs, ammunition depots, and command centers, forcing Russia to fight ever further from its supply lines with dwindling resources. For Russia, the cost is not just measured in tanks and guns. After more than 3 years, the category of military-age men has become a demographic in crisis. Mass casualties, emigration, and forced mobilizations stripped Russian cities and industries of working-age men. The consequences will linger for decades. Fewer students, fewer engineers, a weaker industrial base, and a smaller tax pool to support the elderly and wounded. As the Russian arms industry depletes its Soviet inheritance, local production lags far behind losses. European sanctions locked out key microchips and machine tools, so factories resorted to cannibalizing museum pieces and harvesting washing machine chips for tanks. Alleged recruitment of North Korean troops and purchases of outdated foreign drones underscore the depths of the problem. Meanwhile, Russia's brand as a global arms exporter has collapsed. No one wants to buy what's failing in real time before the world's cameras. On the global stage, Russia's destabilizing moves drove former neutrals into NATO's embrace. Sweden and Finland, once comfortable between East and West, now fortify NATO's northern flank. Military spending has surged not just in Germany, but across Europe, and US and European stockpiles are being refilled and modernized by ramped-up defense industries. Large joint exercises, regular new pledges of security aid, and renewed information sharing among allies now structure the wider strategic environment. On the global stage, Russia's destabilizing moves drove former neutrals into NATO's embrace. Sweden and Finland, once comfortable between East and West, now fortify NATO's northern flank. Military spending has surged, not just in Germany, but across Europe, and US and European stockpiles are being refilled and modernized by ramped-up defense industries. Large joint exercises, regular new pledges of security aid, and renewed information sharing among allies now structure the wider strategic environment. For Ukraine, the formula for success never depended on matching Russia force for force. Instead, it disrupted through speed, deception, and networked innovation, while leveraging Western lifelines, learning faster, and bleeding the Russian army steadily. What Russia once touted as overwhelming force has become a liability. Tanks stuck in mud, rocket barrages answered by pinpoint counter-battery fire, and invulnerable hypersonic missiles swatted down by Western air defenses. But the war's starkest lesson is that power is not measured in raw numbers. Decentralized adaptation, quick learning, and grit, amplified by technology and allied backing, can overturn the most confident plans and unseat even the world's most feared militaries. As Ukraine continues to innovate and Russia struggles to replace its losses, the outcome grows less uncertain by the day. If you want to see a deeper analysis of Ukraine's drone revolution, check out this video. And for news on what's happening day to day on the front, subscribe to Frontline Alert for daily videos.